this video, I tell the story of how I became a face reader under Lillian Bridges, my late teacher, and how her impact and the principles of face reading radically changed the course of my life. Enjoy. Hey there. I wanted to do something a little different today for the face reading tutorial, which is essentially sharing the story of how I became a face reader. And the reason I want to share this story with you all is that the threads and themes of how face reading came into my life are directly applicable to the principles in face reading itself. Face reading does deal with destiny. It deals with gene expression, how we share our gifts, how we connect with the world, and most importantly, how we connect with people. In the current age where we are, the development of AI, the ever-increasing propensity for us to lean into digital capacity in everything, virtual reality coming down the pike, which has already been here, but it's just getting better and better. The thing I want people to understand is that nothing will ever surpass analog, face-to-face human interaction and conversation. And that's how Lillian taught, and that's one of the things about face reading that you really want to pay attention to. The best way to read a face is live, face-to-face in real time. Now, mind you, a lot of what I do with people when I'm reading faces is digital. I'm doing it over Zoom. I have pictures of them. I can see them through the computer. But in an ideal world, one-to-one, face-to-face communication is the way to do it. So I just want to lay this story out because there are some pretty cool themes in this in terms of how Lillian came into my life, how she altered my path radically, and how face reading has continued to shape my life. So, for starters, I met Lillian when I was 29. I was in the midst of Chinese medical school, which was very intense. It was 5 years after my undergrad work. So, that being said, when I met Lillian, she had been a guest speaker at my school, Five Branches University in Santa Cruz, California, and she was teaching Chinese medicine students. And when I met her, I met her. She gave me lots of compliments about my face when I first met her. She was very gracious and very sweet. And then I said, well, I'd love to get a face reading with you. And she went, ooh. She's like, well, I'd be happy to in about 6 to 8 months because my wait list is that long. So I paid my fee and I waited 6 to 8 months until she was coming back through Santa Cruz. And when I got my reading, I came in and she goes, I remember you. And she said, oh. She's like, let me guess. You're an only child and most of your life revolves around something artistic or in the arts. And I remember just shaking my head and I said, I laughed and I said, how do you know that? And she goes, well, we'll get into that. But sit down and let's talk about your face. And the irony is she never really told me how she knew that. But she did. And that first thread right there, I understand the contradictory conundrum that I'm in a little bit, because the way I teach face reading is to say it's not psychic fortune telling. And I still believe it's not, but Lillian had an aptitude and she had a gift and a particular spectrum of how she transmitted her gifts that was very, very unique. So that being said, I'm not going to give you the ins and outs of everything she said about my face, but what she pointed to in that session was, she said, there are some things that are going to stick during this session. There are going to be some things that don't stick, that are just going to fall by the wayside, but the things you can't stop thinking about, I want you to pay attention to. So one was that initial basic commentary she gave. It was so spot on. I still don't know how she did it. And then she came to another part, and it's kind of a mid-session, and she said, she was looking at my face, and she was looking at the age markers, and something about my 33rd year, the age marker for 33, she said, look, she said, this is a metaphor. This is just a picture I'm going to paint for you, but I want you to take this symbol as kind of like a visual metaphor for what might happen around your 33rd year, give or take. I said, okay. And she said, you're going to come to a fork in the road, most likely. And she said, on one hand, you're going to have sort of this spiritual lone wolf kind of approach you can take. She says, you're going to have a chance to kind of go to the top of a mountain and be single, essentially, and dive into all the things that you've always wanted to dive into. And I mentioned martial arts, and she's like, exactly. She's like, you might get the opportunity to go and train with a master, or at least really dive deeply into your martial stuff. And I said, okay. She said, now on the other side, you have the opportunity to essentially get married and have a baby. And she said, look, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but if I were to guess, given what I'm seeing on your face, the direction I would tell you, which is far, far better this go round in this life, is to get married and have a baby. And I said, okay, cool. And we talked about a lot of other stuff. And in the months after that reading, I couldn't stop thinking about that. I thought about it for a long time, just kept running through my head over and over again. And then I didn't think about that idea for about 4 years. And then at 33, I found myself living in Santa Cruz, and I was at this really interesting juncture with my then girlfriend, my now wife, and I had an opportunity. I was living in Corralitos on this house on top of a mountain, and the guy that I was living with was a cannabis farmer. I wasn't growing cannabis, it wasn't my thing, but he was kind of the mind, like, we could live up here. He was a Wing Chun practitioner. I have a background in Chinese martial arts, and he's like, we could really just dive in. You could work with me in some capacity of the business. We could train martial arts, and we could just really cultivate ourselves. And I found that interesting. I thought, boy, that sounds a lot like Lillian. Back in my hometown, about 2.5 hours away, my girlfriend, my now wife, was saying, I really want to get married and have a baby with you. I always have, and I really want to do that. And, the clock's ticking. And I remember just thinking, essentially, holy shit. I thought that metaphor that she said was a metaphor, she called almost to a T. And so I sat with it, and in the end, there's a long, long, long story to all of this, but in the end, I chose to get married and have a baby. And I can say without question, best decision of my life to do that. So, that being said, that really put Lillian on my radar in a way that I can't really put into words. I just thought, man, she's got something. I don't know what this is, but she has got something. Fast forward a couple of years later, I had been studying feng shui for many years. I had a big interest in it. And one of the things in feng shui is your north wall. Okay, all the directions have impact on life themes. The north regulates your destiny, the direction of your life, where you're going. And I noticed something. On the north wall of my house, I had a picture of a sleeping woman. It was one of my wife's pieces of her artwork. Very nice picture, kind of cool, kind of art deco. But it was a single solitary woman sleeping by herself. At the time, my business was reflecting that very thing. I felt alone, I felt lethargic, I felt like I didn't have any drive in terms of what I was doing with my business and my life path in relation to Chinese medicine. So that being said, I changed my northern image to free-flowing water. So the north relates to the water element, but that image made me think about success and movement in my field. I changed that, not talking to Lillian. 2 weeks later, she reached out to me and said, hey, I remember you, and I felt called to reach out to you. Would you want to come to Seattle, to my institute, the Lotus Institute, and train feng shui with me one-on-one? And I remember thinking, of course, absolutely. I thought that would be wonderful. So I did that. I jumped in. And I went there to study feng shui because Lillian was very good at feng shui. And I left that weekend a full-fledged face reading student. And we realized during the course of that meetup that face reading was actually something I should probably do and I was really interested in. So I studied with Lillian. I would go back to Seattle one-on-one and I would work with her. I trained with her, I studied with her. And it was amazing because face reading, like I said, is about person-to-person connection. It's about face-to-face communication. Nothing comes close. And so I did that. And she and I became very good friends. I studied with her diligently. I was able to understand concepts within face reading because I was able to have conversations. I was able to ask questions. I was able to do all of that stuff. And then when my daughter was born, wouldn't you know it, my daughter was the same Western astrological sign and the same lunar sign, a Taurus and fire monkey, respectively. My daughter and Lillian were the exact same signs in that regard. And I remember thinking, boy, you know, the East is pretty big on this whole idea of synchronicities, what they call coincidences, which aren't. Carl Jung believed those things were synchronicities. These were things in your life that you should pay attention to. And so I started to listen, and I thought, man, these are some really interesting signs. Lillian was also of Chinese and German descent. I am. I have German descent. My wife is Chinese, and my daughter also held German blood and Chinese blood. And moreover, my wife's mother's name is Lillian. So I took this all as the universe kind of saying, this is a green light, like, yeah, go down this road. And so I did. And I studied with Lillian, and eventually in 2021, Lillian passed. And the reason I'm telling you this is because face reading and how we access it, how we connect to it, is different for everybody. I'm not sure I can do what Lillian did in that regard. You know, like I said, it's not psychic fortune telling, but Lillian had a pretty unique gift in these arts. And so as you learn to read faces, realize you're going to have aptitudes and strength. In the context of face reading, they're going to be unique to you. And it's not lesser or more in relation to Lillian. How she did it doesn't mean that how you do it is going to be any less. It just means you're going to do it different, because people are different. So I always like to tell this story because face reading kind of fell into my lap, like most things in my life. Most things that I found in my life, I've fallen ass backwards into. Didn't know how I got there, and yet I ended up loving them and following them. And Lillian and her impact in my life was the exact same way. So I just wanted to share this story because I think hearing the story of somebody gives you context. Why am I teaching face reading? It's because of all of these things. And moreover, genuinely helped me. And it's helped me throughout my life. It's one of the tools, and it's not going to speak to everybody, and I'm not here to persuade anyone to go down this road. But if any of these threads strike some notes for you and they resonate for you, keep that in mind. Keep staying the course with face reading. Continue to study. Continue to look at people's faces. And most importantly, don't forget the most important thing in this world. Nothing will ever surpass human-to-human connection. No matter how good the digital gets, analog, oral transmission, oral communication, oral traditions being passed down this way are incredibly valuable. So that's what I got for today. Take care.